The official trailer to Scarf doesn't do the game justice, but I understand that Uprising Studios couldn't really show more without spoiling anything. And now I have a challenge to talk about the game without spoiling it either, as what makes Scarf special is the fact that there's more layers to it than just being an adventure about befriending a pet dragon Scarf that gives you various abilities. Let's just say that the game employs some pretty cool twists which you will be able to figure out in advance if you pay attention. Although, I must say that it feels like Scarf was originally done without any spoken words at all, and then at some point narration was added to some specific story-related cutscenes. And it's because Scarf utilizes visual storytelling in a bunch of its in-game scenes, animations and environmental design, which make it feel like it was supposed to be open for interpretation. But the narration not only clearly defines what is good, what is bad, and how that influences what ending you get, limiting potential interpretations, but also outright makes your actions not make sense in certain circumstances after learning some particular pieces of information. It doesn't make the narrative become less interesting, but it certainly is a bit disappointing considering that Scarf's story is the most important reason to play it. The rest of the game is really good, but just doesn't quite reach its true potential and sometimes feels like it wasn't polished enough. For example, the core mechanics are absolutely fine, but aren't quite there yet for a platformer. First, there are some little things that sometimes make the gameplay a bit annoying, like the fact that when you turn 180 degrees, your character actually makes an arc, which in a small moving platform can make you fall down. For the object interaction prompt to appear, you have to stand in some very specific spots that sometimes can be difficult to find, and the way you turn around doesn't help. There's also a bunch of collision detection issues. Sometimes small stairs don't let you move up without jumping, and I randomly found one particular little rock that the character just didn't want to move past. Also, make sure to not drop down with the vase in hands, as that will lead to a situation where you need to restart the game. But what's more frustrating are the limitations on how you can use your toolkit, mainly caused by the vine ability. You see, after you swing from your scarf like a rope, the scarf stays where it was until you need to use it for another vine or land on the ground. Which means that after swinging from a vine, you can't use your double jump or glide abilities. So if a mistake happens in that scenario, you can't fix it, but more than that, the game's level design is also severely limited by this. And don't get me wrong, the levels are actually really good. The first ocean area is a nice introductory zone. It is linear, but is built in circular patterns to prepare you for much more sprawling environments in the desert, where you will have to search for a bunch of pathways yourself. There are some really nice and original challenges and navigational puzzles, particularly pertaining to the swirl of water that you can take in your hands to sort of create an invisible bubble around yourself that pushes the water away. It's great, and even the platformer segments attempt to be varied enough for the character kit that we have. There is a lot of enjoyment in finding out how to get to all the various level locations, and while the puzzles aren't particularly complex, they're nice space breakers. However, the last area, the forest, for the most part feels like a retread of everything you've been doing in the ocean and the desert. Deactivating crystals, searching for yellow thread lines, navigating underwater to then solve a push and block puzzle. By this point in time, you'd already have done a bunch of similar things in a better implementation to boot. The forest level is not bad, not at all, but it is more flawed, with things like some important interactable objects being pretty hidden among the lush green grass, and there are areas that look like they might house a secret, but there is actually an invisible wall that will lead to your death. At least you always respawn immediately where you died. There is no game overs in Scarf. And because the levels might partially stop being captivating enough, the brain instinctively starts to focus on some other things that feel a bit unpolished. Like the visuals that are absolutely striking in terms of their design, but then with implementation there are small issues there and there. For example, the water splashes spawning pretty far away from your legs, or, at least on the PlayStation 5 version, little artifacts that might give you an impression that something happened to your TV. It's little things, but they add up over the course of the experience. Still, even with all that in mind, Scarf has been a thoroughly enjoyable game that will get a Stasocritic rating of 82. I know I've mentioned a bunch of flaws, but they're not big and are noticeable mostly because of just how many things Scarf does really well. I think it might be easy to think of Scarf as being a derivative game at a first glance, but it's not. It's actually got a lot going for it, even though for the purposes of making the impression that it should, a number of aspects are not shown in the promotional material.